Hello, welcome to another episode of Transfigured. I am going to be talking about moralistic therapeutic deism. This is part 2, see part 1 in the description. And this part is going to be addressing the question, does moralistic therapeutic deism still exist? All right. So, just an overview, moralistic therapeutic deism was a term coined by a sociologist named Christian Smith. It has kind of 5 basic characteristics. There's a God who exists, who created and ordered the world and watches over human life on earth. God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other, as taught in the Bible, but by most world religions. The central goal of life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself. God does not need to be particularly involved in one's life, except when God is needed to resolve a problem. Good people go to heaven when they die. And in my last video, I sort of complimented Christian Smith's definition by trying to give a historical explanation of how it came to be the case that if you interview thousands of US teenage millennials and you ask them what they believe about religion, you get something that looks like moralistic therapeutic deism. And my argument was basically it is American comic civil religion. It's basically a watered down pop Unitarianism with American characteristics. It's Boston to Buffalo in a blender from the years 1810 to about 1893. And the 6 ingredients I said that were part of moralistic therapeutic deism were the Puritan morality coming from the Puritan Calvinist founders of the New England colonies. And that also provides a little bit of eschatology too. And then another ingredient was first wave Unitarianism, which changed the conception of God from being sort of a scary God that you fear to a benevolent God that you love and admire. Second wave Unitarianism, also called transcendentalism, took a spiritual but not religious view of religion and turned it into an individualized, intuition-driven moral self-actualization as opposed to worshiping an external God. And then another ingredient was the pragmatic therapeutic self-help, with varying amounts of new thought, spiritualism, and metaphysical bookstore mismatch. But I mainly attributed this to the influence of Mary Baker Eddy, where the goal of self-actualization is now basically a form of self-therapy. I also added universalism, which is both the lack of the fear of hell, but also an emphasis on pluralism and perennialism. And then the 6th ingredient I said is American exceptionalism, or what I think really should be more accurately called progressive American covenantalism. All right. But then I asked at the end of my presentation, is moralistic therapeutic deism still a thing? Because the sociological research that gave rise to moralistic therapeutic deism as a term was done from like 2005 to 2008. And I said a lot has changed in the last 20 years since I was a teenager, because I wasn't in the study, but I'm the exact same age as someone who would have been in the study. And I feel like a lot has changed and that moralistic therapeutic deism is almost kind of dead. And so here's a preview of what I'll be talking about. I think that the things that killed moralistic therapeutic deism are gay marriage / the LGBT rights movement, which sort of captured moralist, or sort of, I would say, ruptured moralistic therapeutic deism's connection to its Christian roots. Wokeness undermined faith in American progressive covenantalism. Globalism also sort of overrode faith or American centralism. But also, to be a little bit more bipartisan in my critique, I'll say that Donald Trump served as something like a wrecking ball, and another wrecking ball is the new Christian nationalism. All right, so the overall thesis of this video, if I'm just going to sort of walk through this and then I'll go into more detailed examples afterwards. There is a soft power that you can achieve if you make your ideas the background assumption in a pluralistic society. Having this soft power mostly requires a soft hand to avoid being noticed or named. However, the custodians of the background worldview can occasionally add ingredients to the tap water with big results. As the diversity of the group within your fishbowl increases, the background belief system needs to grow increasingly vague and less specific to accommodate growing diversity. The background assumption does often still have way more particularity to it than most people realize, often asking quite a bit of the groups it assimilates, but mostly it tries to avoid overtly looking like it's asking any of the groups that it accommodates to make a change. The assimilation process works best when the obvious outward markers of a group that it is taking in are able to be left intact, but the deeper and less visible aspects are changed or replaced. Moralistic therapeutic deism was and became the background belief system for America for a long time. I'm saying basically 1893 to 2009, although in a different part of this presentation, I'll date it to the end of the Civil War, even though it was still evolving. But even Christian Smith's ability to name and describe it showed that the fish were starting to notice the water by the end of the aughts. Unitarian Universalism / Harvard Divinity School, and most people don't realize that Harvard Divinity School, while technically non-denominational, if you read the fine print, is still basically actually the seminary of Unitarian Universalism. And so Unitarian Universalism / Harvard Divinity School basically tried to take up the role as the custodians of the background belief system, as opposed to really being a belief system in their own right. At first, it was something like a liberal, free-thinking pan-Protestantism, and then it moved towards a Judeo-Christianity to accommodate Catholics and Jews, especially during the 20th century, after large amounts of Catholic immigration and the Holocaust and World War II. By the late 20th century, it was become a pan-religious coexist to handle fully global immigration to the US. But it still had mostly Christian characteristics and an American centrism. And every time it grew in its ability to accommodate more groups, it also shrank in the level of specificity of its actual content. A challenge for the custodians is that every time they dilute the specificity of the content of the background belief system to incorporate more variety, the groups that are already here feel like they get demoted. To go from pan-Protestantism to Judeo-Christianity makes the Christian aspect of America feel decentered and less valued than it was before. Another challenge is these traditionalists don't like it when their belief system goes from part of the background belief system to just being another fish in the water. A risk to the custodians in this process is that the traditionalists will resist this new change and use their numbers to reassert their prior standing to try and make the background religion more specifically theirs again. This causes the custodians to put specific downward pressure on the specific markers of the traditionalists. This is why traditionalist Christians often feel like a anything but Christianity pressure is put on their beliefs, where in the public sphere you can promote any belief except Christianity. The new identities are celebrated and given the red carpet welcome treatment. Meanwhile, traditionalists feel kicked to the curb. You can see this in like a Keep Christ in Christmas sign war. This is the traditionalists wanting to keep the specificity of the background religion tighter as the custodians are simultaneously trying to loosen it. You can also see that there's a trade-off. As the background belief system keeps stripping itself of specificity, it becomes more powerful in some ways by incorporating more and more people. However, it becomes less powerful in others as it loses motivating power and meaningfulness. Christmas becomes a winter holiday about snowmen and Jack Frost, but it's no longer the motivating story of the virgin birth of the Son of God. By the early 2000s, moralistic therapeutic deism was getting so thin that it was no longer providing as much meaning to its adherents. However, it was still pro-American and mostly specifically Christian, with other special and honored guests within the Christian house. But it was stretching to a breaking point of incoherence and nihilism. Let's see here. I'm going to play this clip of The Simpsons, of course, to be my first outside clip. Here we go.
Wow, look at all these flavors. Blessed Virgin Berry, Commandment, Bible Gum.
Or if you prefer, we also have Unitarian ice cream.
There's nothing here.
Exactly.
All right. So Why does Unitarian ice cream feels like there's nothing there? And the reason is twofold. Unitarianism snuck itself into the background religion so that it would be taken for granted, but it also stripped itself of any distinctives so that it wouldn't be noticed that that's what it's doing. A bowl of Unitarian ice cream is like offering a glass of water to a fish. It seems empty, but it actually isn't. All right. Chicago and Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. Moralistic Therapeutic Deism emerges with all of its ingredients fully fledged at the Chicago 1893 Columbian Expo. Moralistic Therapeutic Deism reaches its zenith of power, but also its dying grasp with the election of Obama in 2008. Those are things I both argued for last time. It's also worth noticing Obama's presidential library is currently being built right on the exact site of the World's Fair of 1893. Although I can't help but notice that the architectural quality has declined a little bit. In 1893, we had these awesome looking neoclassical features that were built in like 0 seconds flat. And now we can barely build this weird brutalistic thingy that is way over cost and way over budget and way after schedule. And at best, it sort of looks like some sort of neo-brutalistic tombstone. But can't help but notice the irony of that. So, like I said, I think Obama, his first term was some sort of zenith, but also endpoint. And sometimes things are loudest right as they're about to die. For Obama, Christian was a Christian nation, but with a generous and welcoming pluralism. And Obama, especially in 2008, was putting a new emphasis on outreach to the Muslim world. This was, of course, in sort of counterpoint to perceived, discrimination against Muslims during the War on Terror and the aftermath of 9/11. America is, and for Obama, he very much believes this as much as anybody, at least he did in 2008, that America is in this progressivist covenant with God to be the locus of God's actions in history, manifesting providence. America can live up to this calling or it can fail to do so. And he kind of like in his own person embodied a post-racial America where the quality of character finally triumphed over the color of your skin. All right. So here is a clip of Obama running for president in 2008, being interviewed by the evangelical megachurch pastor, Rick Warren.
Define marriage.
I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman. Now, for me as a Christian, it's also a sacred union. God's in the mix.
So marriage is a sacred union. For Obama, as a Christian, marriage is between one man and one woman. God is in the mix. And like, I think it's amazing. 2008, at least in my memory, was not that long ago. I think I can remember that exact interview. All right. So I want to tell a story from my time in college that I think is sort of a microcosm of a lot of the things that I want to talk about in this presentation. So I'm reading from the Cornell Daily Sun, the campus newspaper, and this is from spring 2009 when I was a sophomore on campus. A campus Christian group that receives funding from the student activity fee is coming under scrutiny after a student was asked by advisors to step down from its leadership team when he told them that he had openly accepted his homosexuality. This incident is also raising questions about the effectiveness of campus mechanisms for addressing instances of discrimination. Chris Donahue, 09, who joined the Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship when he was a freshman, said he had been openly struggling to reconcile his sexuality with his faith in Chi Alpha before he was asked to step down from the leadership team by Matt and Tracy Herman, the organization's pastors. The Hermans, both members of Chi Alpha at Missouri State University before graduating in 2002, became Cornell Chi Alpha's campus ministers in 2006. The leadership team consists of 12 or 13 especially dedicated students who lead Bible studies, teach, and are good examples. According to Danielle D'Ambrosio, class of 010, Chi Alpha's president, The leadership team differs from titled leadership positions because students do not have to apply to be part of the team. Before joining the leadership team, Donahue was vice president during his junior year. To enter a titled position in Chi Alpha, students must apply through the Hermans and demonstrate that they uphold certain values, including not engaging in premarital sex and refraining from drinking alcohol and taking drugs, according to Donahue. I thought it would be an awesome opportunity to be an openly gay man in a Christian organization, Donahue said. After Donahue finished his term as vice president, he was going to be on the leadership team last fall. The Hermans told Donahue that they were comfortable with his position as long as he did not engage in a relationship. However, after Donahue met his boyfriend last summer and affirmed his acceptance of his sexuality, the Hermans asked him to step down from the team without consulting the rest of the organization. I told them I've thought about how my sexuality. I've thought about my sexuality, and I'm 100% okay with my sexuality. I wanted the opportunity to show them I love God and I'm gay and it's okay, Donahue said. D'Ambrosio explained that Donahue was asked to step down because he no longer believed his sexuality was a sin and stopped actively working to overcome it, disregarding the Bible. The decision to ask Chris to step down was not that he did something wrong in having homosexual tendencies. It was because he no longer thought it was wrong. I support the decision fully, D'Ambrosio said. All right, now this is from a report from FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. If you're a fan of Jonathan Haidt, you'll be familiar with that organization. This is I don't know, an article or a post that they wrote around the same time. Cornell University Assembly has voted to remove part of a proposed policy in the campus code of conduct that posed a significant threat to freedom of association, the Cornell Sun reports. After months of deliberation, the University Assembly passed a resolution this October to remove a clause from the campus code of conduct designed to prevent special interest student organizations from discriminating against certain groups in their criteria for membership. The resolution cited the need for more extensive debate on the interplay of discrimination, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly on campus. The policy was originally devised after Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship asked student leader Chris Donahue to step down from his leadership position in the group. Donahue had publicly announced that he was unapologetically in a gay relationship in contravention to the organization's beliefs. The University Assembly subsequently froze the group's funding. And after finding that the group did not violate any policies, funding was restored. But the policy change was suggested so that in the future, Cornell student groups could not take similar actions. All right. The Sun notes in May, FIRE wrote Cornell President David Skorton regarding the incident. We expressed our concern about the threat to freedom of religion, expressive association, and legal equality posed by the university's response to the incident. As we explained in our letter, an expressive organization, whether it is religious, political, or something else, must be allowed to limit its leadership to people who share the group's beliefs. The college Democrats must not be forced to maintain a leader who no longer is a Democrat or rejects various democratic political beliefs. A Muslim group must not be forced to maintain a leader who no longer believes in the tenets of Islam or that the group deems important. And a Christian group must not be forced to maintain a leader who no longer agrees with the specific Christian doctrine of the group. Following receipt of our letter, Skorton asked that a footnote be inserted into the policy to assure protection for free speech, freedom of association, and religious freedom. So, I mean, I remember all of this pretty intensely. I met Chris Donahue. I actually knew him not super well, but we knew who each other were, and we would wave to each other if we saw each other on campus because we were both very involved in the Christian fellowship scene. I remember the first time I met him being like, that's interesting. He's a leader in a Christian fellowship, and as best I can tell, he seems kind of gay. And it turns out that anyway, you get what I'm saying. I won't go any further with that train of thought. But it was interesting. You can tell that his Christian fellowship, which was not the same one I was in, was walking a delicate balance. You know, he knew that he struggled with same-sex attraction, and the leadership of the organization, and basically many other people as well, knew that he struggled with this, or that he had same-sex attraction, but he wanted to conduct himself in a way that was in accordance with Christian morality. And then at some point, he changed his mind and wanted to show that you could be Christian and gay at the same time, and it was okay. And he took a boyfriend and was behaving according to that belief. And that's what triggered him to be removed from his position. I remember there was also a protest vigil, I remember, that was hundreds of people on the main quad. And I believe it happened at the same time as Chi Alpha was meeting. And Chi Alpha was a pretty small group, right? It's the charismatic Christian fellowship group. And it had maybe 30 students or so in it who would meet regularly. And there was a protest of maybe, say, 300 or so students outside their meeting. And so it's interesting, the protesters think that they're resisting power and oppression, whereas the Christian groups are scared because it feels like they're vastly outnumbered. They have almost no influence on the student assembly that's voting on whether or not they can get funding. So I think that this was a really interesting test case for a lot of the things that I want to talk about in this video, right? It's sort of the arena in many ways rising up against the Christian groups. I mean, this is obviously just on a college campus, but Ivy League college campuses tend to be the place where new ideas are tested out or embodied or enacted for the first time before they are then enacted and embodied at the national level when those students graduate and eventually take up leadership positions in politics and other areas. And as many of you who also know my story will know, that I was in a leadership position of my own Christian fellowship, not Chi Alpha, but a different one. And that none of us had been asked to sign a statement of faith prior to this incident. We were just sort of, sniff tested by the campus ministers. And if we had, passed the sniff test after a certain period of time, we could be allowed into leadership. And then after this incident was getting moving, our campus pastor decided that it would be better legal best practices to have all of the leaders of my campus fellowship sign statements of faith, just to make sure we are all on the same page and stuff like that. And that statement of faith had Trinitarian bullet points. And I told the campus pastor that I could not sign this statement of faith because I didn't believe in the Trinity. He didn't know that beforehand and was quite surprised to learn that someone could look so much like an evangelical Christian, pass the sniff test, as I said, and then only later be exposed to show that he didn't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. And so I was sort of quietly asked to step down from leadership. And there's no articles written about me in the student newspaper at this time because I didn't want to hurt the Christian fellowships. I wanted them to succeed. I didn't want them kicked off campus. And I was willing to sort of quietly take my demotion without my friends, at least at first, knowing why. And so this played a big part in my story. And in many ways, I feel like I'm still trying to wrestle with and work out what exactly happened to me at Cornell, my sophomore and junior year. All right. But this also, like I said, marked a turning point in the life of moralistic therapeutic deism. While traditional Christianity had been asked to demote and empty itself of its prior place in American life, it was never asked quite so directly to change itself or be accused that it was specifically immoral. The background religion shifts from being open and welcoming American Christianity to being explicitly post and anti-Christian. Traditional Christianity was now an awkward obstacle towards greater inclusivity. It was also considered morally wrong. And the attempt to kick the Christian fellowships off of campus, which ultimately failed in this example at Cornell, foreshadows the future leadership's desire to remove traditional Christianity. Basically, I mean, this pairs super well with Aaron Renn's thesis about positive world, neutral world, negative world, where originally Christianity was seen as a positive thing. To be a Christian, to belong to a church, to be religious was viewed positively. And then it became sort of a neutral thing, right? Sort of in that middle 20th century, later half of the 20th century, being Christian was like a good option among many other good options. But if you weren't Christian, that wasn't bad. If you were Christian, it wasn't bad either. But right around this time, it shifts from being a neutral world to a negative world. And the lightning rod issue sparking this is gay rights, gay marriage, LGBT inclusion, etc. Because if we need to include LGBTQ people and their sexual activity in our inclusive world, well, then Christianity, or at least traditional Christianity, can no longer believe in its old sexual ethic. It has to be asked to change its sexual ethic. And that's a big difference from being one fish in the bowl competing with the other fish to being told that there's something about you that's no longer acceptable in the new water. And so I'll play, I have to play this obligatory clip from Tim Keller at some point in this presentation, so might as well do it now.
This is hard. So let me give you the best answer I can. Liberal democracy, which is how I'm using the word liberal very broadly. Liberal democracy, which is how our Constitution was written, how our country was founded, was the idea that the government is neutral when it comes to religion and religious beliefs. It does not impose religion and religious beliefs on people. It doesn't impose a worldview on people. It doesn't say, it doesn't hook up to Catholicism or Lutheranism or whatever. And therefore, it's big on freedom of association, freedom of speech. It's a pluralistic society, so you have Jews and Catholics and various kinds of Protestants and atheists, and it doesn't impose a worldview or religious views on people, and or moral values on people.
Grip, stability.
It came out of the Enlightenment because the Enlightenment was born a couple hundred years before America in the wars of religion, when everybody was fighting. Basically, people were dying as to which religion my country is going to be. And a lot of the thinkers of Europe came up and said, hey, you know what? Let's create a society in which there's no one religion that is the official religion. And we are coming together just as reasonable people, and we decide how we want to live together. And we park our religion at the door when we come into the public realm, and we make laws based on, common good and that kind of thing. And for a very long time, that worked in America. And I just want you to know that that's the problem. The big problem is that liberal democracy is in crisis. And the reason it's in crisis is because, and here's the irony, and I don't think I think I could trace this out if I was writing something down. I think it'd be a little hard orally right now to do it. But weirdly enough, liberal democracy kind of led to the decline of religion, probably. Because it really said, religion is okay for your private life, but when it comes to the public life, we really don't need it. It's really not important. We just use science and reason to figure out how we're going to live. And you park your religion at the door when we come out here and talk together. Whether you're a Jew or a Catholic or a Muslim or a Christian or an atheist, you come together, and we just decide this. And it was part of I think what weakened faith, because it was really saying faith is a private thing. It just makes you happy, but it really isn't all that necessary for how you live your whole life. Whatever. But the fact is that when religion started to decline, the thing that now, I have some atheist friends who admit this, say the thing that actually held us together was not freedom of speech, freedom of association, using our reason. What held us together was like 80% of the population went to either a Catholic or a Protestant church. They actually went. And that even though, the liberals and conservatives in Congress were arguing over taxes or unions, but they would never argue over same-sex marriage. They all thought it would be a horrible thing. In other words, everybody was and 80-90% of people were nominal Christians. And because they were nominal Christians, they had a moral base, and they lived with the illusion that we're really not a Christian country. We're a secular country. But the fact is, they'd never really had to deal with pluralism using liberal democratic structure. And when real pluralism came along, we found out we couldn't abide it. And so now here's the first thing that happened. The first group of people that actually moved away from liberal democracy into we're going to impose our worldview on you were the progressives. They were the first people to start doing it. Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury, former, he calls it programmatic secularism rather than procedural secularism. In other words, it used to be the government was secular in the sense of being a neutral umpire and said, okay, we want to make sure everybody has a level playing field to make your case and live your lives. But programmatic secularism goes like this. Put it this way. In the 60s and 70s, even the 50s, if somebody wrote a book saying it's okay to be gay, that would probably be not publishable because it would be banned as obscene speech, right? Today, if you try to write a book or say it's not okay to be gay, now it's also condemned as obscene speech, except it's called hate speech. And what's happened is there was a kind of hegemony. It wasn't pluralistic. There was a kind of nominal Christian hegemony that really did run things. And when that fell apart, now we realize, well, who's going to get in charge of defining hate speech and obscene speech? And progressives said, we're going to do it. And so what they actually have done is they are imposing a kind of programmatic, hard secularism. And conservatives and Christians have seen that. They say, you know what, you're not being neutral anymore. You're really actually pushing. You're actually saying you have to keep your religion totally, totally private, when our religion doesn't allow that. Now, by the way, it's the same problem with Islam. So they're going to have the more Muslims that are here, the more problems they're going to have there too. But the issue is that conservatives are pushing back, wrongly, I think, and are saying, yeah, liberal democracy doesn't work. There's a lot of conservatives saying we need Christian nationalism. We actually need to get, the state needs to be overtly Christian, overtly Protestant, or there needs to be, the Catholic integralists say that the Catholic Church should be the state church. And what they're saying is there's absolutely no way to get that moral consensus. We're always going to be fragmented. Liberal democracy doesn't work. And it is a crisis, because the fact is, as long as everybody was a nominal Christian, liberal democracy works, and it doesn't. We're not that anymore. Liberal democracy undermined Christianity and religion in general and created this situation where we truly are divided. And now the old liberal democratic proceduralism doesn't bring us together. We're just at each other's throats. We have alternate views of reality, totally different views of reality. And I don't have a good way forward. I mean, if you were asking me that question, I'm not going to answer it because I'm actually thinking it out. I still think liberal democracy is way better than Catholic integralism or Protestant Christian nationalism. But I also feel like you've got to call out the progressives, to say what you consider democracy actually isn't. It is actually an imposition of your worldview on us. So I feel like we have to call both sides out. But when I do that, I am, maybe Carrie, I am called both sidism, playing, or being, trying to be apolitical when you can't be. I don't think that's possible. But I do think it's fair to say, sorry, right and left, I don't know what the alternative is, but what you are proposing is absolutely wrong. Will never really work.
GhostX sees it all.
So interesting stuff from Tim Keller. Although if you've watched this channel enough times, you've seen that clip enough times, it's sort of hard to avoid. So let's see here. One thing I didn't mention last time was mainline Christianity. And a couple of you in the comments section sort of pointed that out, like, it seems like you missed an opportunity to talk about mainline Christianity. And so mainline Christianity comes from the name of a train line that was built in Philadelphia among the first commuter train lines in the world in the 1880s, the Philadelphia elite left the stinky, dirty, dangerous city and built what we now call suburbs with safe, good schools and big yards. I live on the Chicago North Shore, which is named after the North Shore train line built around the same time and for the same reason. The mainline churches are Congregationalists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists, Unitarians, and maybe Northern Baptists. All have their origins in England and would primarily be ethnically WASPs. Lutherans are close to being a mainline church, but their Germanic origins sort of exclude them. But just like how a train is led by the first engine car, Unitarianism was the engine car leading all the other mainline churches in a liberalizing direction. Each was following at a certain distance. The Congregationalists, especially the United Church of Christ, seemed to be first behind. Episcopalians were pretty close. Methodists and the Baptists might have been furthest behind. But nevertheless, the destination was the same. The self-emptying pattern that allowed moralistic therapeutic deism or Unitarianism to accommodate ever greater diversity was eventually asked of these traditions as well. While the vestments, buildings, and liturgical details might still distinguish the different kinds of mainline churches, the theology converged into the same moralistic therapeutic deism, mimicking Unitarianism at the front of the train. However, Unitarianism wasn't copying this from anybody. They were the inventor. It wasn't imitating anyone. It was inventing and disseminating this liberalizing trend as it went along. And basically, all mainline churches have become openly pro-gay marriage and pro-pride flag now. I think originally the mainline custodians of moralistic therapeutic deism hoped to maintain their place controlling the levers of power available to the background religion directors and accommodate the pride movement. But this seems to have largely failed. These churches are just plain dying demographically. The new cutting edge of the LGBTQ plus crowd doesn't really seem interested in going to any of these mainline churches, no matter how many pride flags they wave. It was just too obvious of a break from Christian tradition, and there was no way to be credibly, authentically Christian and fly the pride flag. I just don't think that's worked out for anybody. I think both sides smell a rat. The traditional Christians be like, no, that's not right. Christianity's never taught that. And even the gay people will be like, I appreciate the gesture, but like, why are you doing that? I mean, you're trying to pretend to be something you're not. Why would I go join a church that's trying to pretend to be something it isn't, or is trying to be some incoherent mumbo jumbo? As PVK says, a Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. The mainline church was now finally trusting themselves more than they trusted Jesus when it came to sexual matters. All right, so that brings me to wokeness. What is wokeness? Rick commented and was surprised that I used the term, but yet I think we all basically know what I mean when I use the term wokeness, even if I won't give like a 10 bullet point specific definition. Jordan Peterson was trying to name and outline it during his first wave. I think the anti-woke atheists like James Lindsay and others were right about a lot of the Marxist and critical theory elements inside wokeism, but I think they missed some of the religious moralistic therapeutic deism, Unitarian Universalism, and other American elements that were actually a very important part of wokeness. Unitarian Universalism wasn't just copying wokeness, it helped invent and distribute it. The Beacon Press was founded in 1854 as the publishing arm of the American Unitarian Association, and it is still the publishing arm of Unitarian Universalism. In 1993, it published Race Matters by Cornell West. In 2011, it published A Queer History of the United States by Michael Bronsky. In 2014, it published An Indigenous People's History of the U.S. by Dunbar Ortiz. In 2018, it published White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. In 2021, it published Nice Racism, How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm, also by Robin DiAngelo. So I think that Unitarian Universalism basically became something like, and if you search for Unitarian Universalist churches on a map, it's, I mean, obviously there's a lot in New England, but when you look outside New England of where it came from, it's basically clustered around college campuses. And it's something like the religious movement that is like the multi-site location of the intellectual educated elite or something like that. And that this, it provided actually an institution that fostered the ideas of wokeness, helped invent many of them, helped incubate a lot of their thinkers, was sort of the religious spiritual community thingamajigger that a lot of these figures belong to. And their location right next to college campuses helps explain why they were close to the action and why they were actually able to be the thing that helps distribute wokeness to the different college campuses where it mainly acted. In August 2020, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, police shot an African-American named Jacob Blake. Protests led to riots. This was pretty shortly after George Floyd. These clashes with law enforcement led to riots and arson. 2 protesters were killed. Kyle Rittenhouse, who was part of a group trying to defend the city from the rioters, shot a 3rd protester and was later found not guilty of murder due to self-defense. The Bradford Community Unitarian Universalist Church was partially burnt during these riots. Its church sign read "Black Lives Matter" as it was on fire. Unitarian helped foster, incubate, and disseminate wokeness, and other mainline churches were following along pretty close behind. But if you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. Let's see here. I'm going to play this clip by Peugeot and Richard Rollin talking about the 1619 Project.
I think one of the things that you can see, and this is important for people to understand what's happening, is that what is that project? What is it? The 1619 project, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to understand what it is that this project is, right? The project is trying to place the founding in America before this founding,
right,
and say
right.
that the slave ship that came to America, that is supposedly the real founding of America, and therefore, right. So what you have is you have people who are trying to realign the titular spirit of America to something which is disconnected to the story right now, which is a fragment of the past. It's like a detail of the past that isn't usually contained in the story. And they're trying to say, no, this is the spirit you're under.
Yeah.
Right? This is the God that you serve. The God that you serve, the spirit that you serve, the one that binds you, is this spirit from 1619. And therefore, that's the secret, real story of America. And there's a desire to destroy America is what it is. It's a desire to destroy it by allying yourself with the old gods. Like this is like a story trope, folks. What you want to do is you want to ally yourself with the old gods. You want to like in the Hellboy story, for example, like you want to raise these titan gods that are out there in the cosmos, and you want to bring them into the world in order to destroy the current story. And this is what the 1619 Project is. So it's just important to understand how relevant what it is you're talking about is, because it is not just it's not just fun to think about this. Like these are strategies, these are magical techniques that people use to transform reality.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like things like that are spells, and I don't know how much we're allowed to say about this. I guess if I shouldn't say this, somebody can edit it. As part of your indoctrination as a good American, we took you to a private museum.
Oh yeah,
full of early American artifacts. But the individual who started this museum, which is the largest private collection in the world of this stuff, as far as I know, he started it because there were literally people in kind of pushing for that 1619 project who were buying up early American artifacts, papers, memorabilia, etc., and then just destroying them, right? In a kind of like a willful attempt. It's a kind of iconoclasm, actually.
Yeah.
right? It's like a willful attempt to try to destroy the relics of what
This world. Yeah.
of this particular world that we're living in. You could say the American civil religion, and I'm not saying that in a cynical way, by the way. Like that's just it is what it is, right? So this individual who put the collection together put it together basically so that it would be so that these things could be preserved and they could kind of be saved from destruction. And so among other things, we got to hold like I still haven't shared the picture because I don't want to trigger all the Masons out there, but like George Washington's surveying compass and the shirt collar that Abraham Lincoln was wearing when he was assassinated. It's still got his blood on it. Jonathan touched Lincoln's blood. So he is more American than most of you guys now. And a bunch of other crazy things, obviously.
So this deliberate attack on the American story. So wokeness, as represented by the 1619 Project at the New York Times, is like a spiritual narratival warfare on the American progressive covenantalism. American progressive covenantalism is not the belief that America is perfect, but rather it's the belief that God will bless us if we serve as agents, manifesting his providence into the world, in our society, as an example for the rest of the world to see and emulate. 1619 is chosen as the date deliberately right before 1620, when the Mayflower arrived, although Winthrop, who I quote from the City on the Hill sermon, technically arrived in 1630. But it's an attempt to reframe America as basically totally depraved. Our values are a lie. Our Constitution is a lie. Our justice system is a lie. Even our food, which has sugar in it, is connected to slavery. So even our food is racist. It's irredeemably white supremacy all the way down. And ironically, I think the 1619 view of America is almost more Calvinist in its pessimism than Winthrop. Winthrop still had this idea that we could live up to our destiny or we could fail to live up to our destiny, and it was in our power to do so. Not a particularly Calvinist idea, really, if you think about it. But this idea that America is just totally depraved and that there's nothing we can do about it. We were born in slavery and white supremacy, and nothing we can do can ever escape it. And so the Unitarian Universalist Church, which for a long time was very pro-American and very much the defender of the American story, and you can imagine Unitarian Universalists from even not that long ago being horrified at the idea that some group would be trying to buy up and destroy American relics, now posts Black Lives Matter signs on their church signs. But yet, even this was not enough to ward off the riots. BLM burnt their church down anyway. Wokeness destroys even the institutions and arenas that gave it birth. All right, I want to push back against it in a direction that it seems like I'm going. My analysis might suggest that moralistic therapeutic deism is a left-wing thing, but I don't think that's really true. It's only kind of become true recently. Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans had much more direct role in the rise and spread of moralistic therapeutic deism than the Democrats did early on. And in the 20th century, Republicans and Democrats were equally moralistically therapeutically deist, as far as I can tell. They might mix the different ingredients together with different emphases and concentrations, but it was still the same ingredients. Ronald Reagan is honestly probably the best, most quintessential example of moralistic therapeutic deism that I can think of. He was born in 1911 in Tampico, Illinois. He grew up in Disciples of Christ, which is sort of like a liberal mainline version of the Churches of Christ from the Stone Campbell movement, which was pretty popular in rural Illinois. As an adult, he called himself born again, but he rarely went to church and was never officially affiliated with any denomination. He had the standard, vaguely Christian American moral beliefs. He had a strong relationship with Norman Vincent Peale, who was the founder of the power of positive thinking idea, which is very similar to the New Thought ideas and Mary Baker Eddy, right? This idea that you can think good things and manifest them into your environment. Ronald Reagan frequently quoted City on a Hill and was a firm believer in the American progressive covenantalism. He was as firm a believer in that as anyone who's ever lived. His wife also dabbled in astrology, giving him a faint connection to the occult and the theosophical elements that I mentioned last time from Blavatsky. He is basically a perfect example of moralistic therapeutic deism. When Christian Smith wonders why all these teenagers born between 1984 and 1990 are moralistic therapeutic deists, he could do worse than to look at the influence of Ronald Reagan. My main point is that even recently, moralistic therapeutic deism did not have a clear partisan slant. So, arena versus agent. Moralistic therapeutic deism was in some ways intentionally crafted, but also organically shaped to be the background belief system of the United States. It serves as the arena in which the various belief systems, denominations, religions, and political parts operate. Managing an arena requires a different set of skills and goals than does being an agent within that arena. The managers of the Major League Baseball Association desire to help the sport be competitive and entertaining, which requires a focus on fairness. The commissioner is not trying to win the World Series. He wants you to watch the World Series. The teams themselves try and win the World Series. Moralistic therapeutic deism functions best when it is not noticed but simply assumed. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't have its custodians. The custodians might be a combination of highly positioned elites like professors in the Harvard Divinity School, but also popular figures like Oprah. But sometimes the arena starts to envy the agents. Sometime in the 2010s, it began to feel like moralistic therapeutic deism was less about being the arena and started feeling like an agent itself. The left wing's stronger connections to the elite institutions started to tempt them to bend the rules in their favor. It would be something like if the Yankees started to use their connection to the MLB commissioner to tilt the rules and the rulings in their favor. While in many ways the arena custodians have more power than the agents, there are some things that only the agents can do. And now I need to transition to talking about Donald Trump. While Trump himself still has many of the traits of moralistic therapeutic deism, he grew up in Norman Vincent Peale's church, which taught the power of positive thinking, like I already mentioned with regards to Reagan. Trump clearly believes in God, but he's clearly not particularly devout. He obviously doesn't belong to any particular church, and he definitely believes in American exceptionalism and greatness. However, his personal behavior directly clashes with Puritan morality. He was by no means the first president to have a not very Puritan sexual history, but he was the first public and unapologetic person to have such a history to run for president, and that was without precedent. Also, his gambling, he owns casinos, his cameos in porn films, he's on his third marriage, his complete lack of any form of humility, his conspicuous consumption. He calls it 2 Corinthians instead of 2 Corinthians. But yeah, he's also a teetotaler and very loyal to his family. So he has a lot of the characteristics of moralistic therapeutic deism, just not really the morality part. And Donald Trump was reacting to a growing sense that the arena's custodians were starting to feel unfairly tilted towards the left. Donald Trump's rise also greatly alarmed the custodians, tempting them to further use their powers to try and prevent him from winning, or after he'd won, to prevent him from effectively governing and using the power that he had won. This has created a vicious cycle in which Trump gains more power. The establishment resists him while tarnishing their neutral reputation and destroying public trust and eroding any sense of the boundary between the arena and the agents. But then Trump only gains more power as he reacts against this. This process is also one of the forces ripping moralistic therapeutic deism to shreds. This is similar to kind of what started to happen when I was at Cornell, where it seemed like the arena was starting to play favorites and to not be a neutral umpire, although FIRE, that organization, was trying to hold Cornell accountable to being a fair arena and not being an agent in the arena. The greater closeness of the gay rights proponents to the arena custodians that really wanted gay rights to happen and viewed the conservative Christians as obstacles to the progress they wanted started to wield the powers of the arena against the agent. I really, really think it was the gay rights movement and the gay marriage question that tempted the arena custodians to enter the arena as agents to get the outcomes that they desired. All right. Donald Trump as abomination that causes desolation. So this is from Daniel chapter 11, verses 31 through 32. Forces from him, and him is sort of like this antichrist figure, shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. From the left-wing perspective, Trump was something like an abomination that causes desolation to the American progressive covenant. Progress is only supposed to go in one direction. The arc of history is only supposed to bend in one direction. Trump's election seemed like America was abandoning its commitment to progress, and that would cause America to lose its special anointed status, like the Antichrist offering profane sacrifices in the temple, leading God to desolate his presence from among the people. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. For progressives, Trump is an Antichrist-like figure using flattery to seduce Americans to violate the progressive covenant, risking our standing before God as his favored nation, or if you don't like God, reducing our standing in the judgment of history, you could say. Trump dismantling USAID is like the cessation of the daily sacrifices. Those sacrifices were how we implemented our progress. That USAID was how we made progress happen. He's cutting off the sacrifice that gives us our connection to God. James Comey is an example of people who know God and are standing firm and taking action. But from the other side, the arena seems to have betrayed its neutrality. It was clearly picking favorites. It betrayed its respect for traditional Christianity, and what was needed was a powerful, almost chaos monster Leviathan character who we could use as an agent, not only to beat the other agent, but to stand up to the arena itself. Trump's lack of respectability is not a bug, it's a feature for this task. This results in a loss of faith in American progressive covenantalism from both sides, but for very different reasons. All right, now I'm going to talk about nationalism versus globalism. In 1993, the Parliament of the World's Religions gathered in Chicago on the 100th anniversary of the first Parliament. All right, and I'm going to play this clip, and I'll sort of narrate what's happening. There's a guy in like a blue suit that sort of looks like a spacesuit. He's just sort of prayed and bowed his head. He's bald and doesn't have eyebrows. He's sort of ethnically ambiguous. It's unclear what religion he represents. It sort of looks like a Buddhist monk from space, something like that. On stage are people in vestments from lots of other religious traditions.
As it becomes increasingly evident that the crisis of Western civilization is in the last resort a spiritual crisis, which due to the absence of great common and compelling convictions, and that none of the ideologies which are at present in control can pretend to bring about a true integration, men everywhere are searching for a new universalism. We are entering an age of universalism. Wherever you turn, one speaks about global education, global information, global communications. Every profession on earth now is acquiring a global dimension.
Every profession on earth is acquiring a global dimension. We need a new universalism. So, due to the absence of great common and compelling convictions, and that none of the ideologies that are at present in control can pretend to bring about a true integration, men everywhere are searching for a new universalism. That's Hans Kuhn calling for a new global universalism. We have already had many universalisms, though. Christianity was a universalizing religion built on Judaism. Constantine sought a mere monotheism to unite Rome, both the pagan and the Christian parts. Islam was also a universalizing religion. Unitarian Universalism attempted to reintegrate Protestantism into one big thing. Baha'i, also popular in the 1890s, was a Persian syncretist attempt to bring about a new universalism. However, universalisms have a habit of turning into particularisms, and then those particularisms require a new future universalism to bring them about. But I think you can understand what Hans Kung was saying, is that, to have this global thing, this global institution, this global consciousness, we need some new universalism that's bigger than all of these universalisms we have in the past to unite the world into one big thing. So, moralistic therapeutic deism as nationalism versus universalism. The American progressive covenantalism, which was an attempted balance between nationalism and globalism. It applied particularly to America and therefore had a boundary and a body to it. It had particular institutions, governments, and geography, etc. But its highest aspirations were global and universal, right? You want to be a city on a hill. A city is a particular thing, but you're a city on the hill so that the watching world can imitate you, and that watching world is universal. In this way, it mimicked Judaism with its balance as the one universal God's particular chosen people. And so moralistic therapeutic deism had this balance between nationalism and universalism, but it was still mostly a nationalist thing. But the post-World War II consensus. After victory in World War II, America's power and influence reached unprecedented heights in all of history. Eleanor Roosevelt was a leader at the United Nations, and she helped to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaiming as the highest aspiration of the common people. Proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the peoples of member states themselves and among the peoples of territories under their jurisdiction. In the Universal Declaration of it's basically the Declaration of Independence gone global and universal. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. But any American who hears that sentence will recognize that something has been left out. The word God or creator has been left out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the exact place where it's mimicking the Declaration of Independence that did mention our creator. As America grows in power, the temptation is for the American arena custodians to become the global arena custodians, not just the America arena custodians, not just letting other countries emulate us, but striving for that almost invisible soft power of being the background assumption of the whole world. As I mentioned in my main thesis section earlier, as the arena attempts to expand itself to accommodate ever more diversity, it must sacrifice previously held particularity. As the American elite now attempt to be the global elite, they must sacrifice American nationalism. Just as sacrificing Christianity and the particularity of Christianity put downward pressure on expressed forms of Christian identity that felt like a anything but Christianity rule, now there was a downward pressure on American identity and anything but American pressure. But this really stresses the ability of moralistic therapeutic deism to maintain coherence, as the American progressive covenantalism was a key component of its structure. These aspiring American globalists now viewed American identity and American patriotism as obstacles to their new desired role. They made decisions from the seats of American power that elevated themselves towards this goal at the sacrifice of ordinary Americans. So the question of who killed moralistic therapeutic deism, I really think that, as I said, gay marriage or pride or LGBTQ caused a fundamental rupture with moralistic therapeutic deism's roots and partnership with traditional Christianity. Christianity's morality became seen as evil, not good or neutral. So the moral part of moralistic therapeutic deism, which had always taken Christianity for granted, now viewed Christian morality as something that needed to be discarded and trampled underfoot. With traditional Christianity and its morality now obsolete, the arena was tempted to break its neutrality and act more like an agent. While pride struck at moralistic therapeutic deism's relationship with Christianity, wokeness and globalism simultaneously struck at moralistic therapeutic deism's relationship with America, nationalism, and patriotism. And that's why it makes sense that wokeness and globalism often go together. They have the same shared goal of weakening the American identity as this thingamajigger aspires to become a global identity instead of an American identity. It has to depress the American exceptionalism, which had brought it along thus far. Meanwhile, moves towards globalism and ever greater accommodation stressed the capabilities of moralistic therapeutic deism by removing particularities, some of which were found to actually be load-bearing pillars of the whole structure. Trump emerges as a reaction to these forces, and by counter-reaction is a catalyst for the accelerating disintegration of moralistic therapeutic deism. However, unlike Abraham Lincoln, the bullet aimed at Trump missed its target, and so his movement moves on. But what comes next? What's next for America as moralistic therapeutic deism loses its pride of place and continues to unravel? I think what will happen is that from the end of the Civil War till now, America has had this shared arena with competing players in the arena. But I think we're entering a stage, and maybe we're already here, where we actually have two competing arenas. This can be especially dangerous because what governs the interactions between the arenas? Is it just the rules of nature? And that's why I feel like so much of like current discourse and controversy and social media feeds and doom scrolling is the sense that bad things happen, but the other side won't take credit or blame or ownership for it. And it's this constant game of, you're really bad at Nikki. No, you're really bad at Nikki. But there's no neutral arbitrator to settle these disputes or to hand out punishment when one side deserves it, because the two arenas don't share a shared moral sense or a shared sense of judgment and justice. I think that we might have enough institutional inertia to make it through this phase, but it's going to be really dangerous, and it's going to put really strong pressure on institutions that are supposed to be neutral, like the judiciary, election officials, federal agencies, academia, and perhaps most worryingly, even the military. And if the military gets involved, then that will lead to basically outright civil war. The two parties will no longer be offering competing political solutions. They will be offering competing moral visions for how to even do politics. And so now I'm going to play a clip from Trigonometry.
Very powerful point. I guess the next logical question is, we've got this new religion, whatever this is, as you've said yourself. But to me, it doesn't seem more a religion. It seems kind of a mishmash of ideologies with no real.
Well, that is what religion is.
Yeah, I take.
You know, that's. But there is no God.
But there is no God, and what I was trying to say is it doesn't seem to be a core. And I guess my question.
So it's floating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, unpleasant as it may seem, is can society last without this core to it?
We will find out. I mean, I would say
that's an optimistic answer.
I mean, I would say that there are many, many paths, and many paths that our society will take, because it's fracturing in all kinds of ways. You know, there are many, many different perspectives, and those aren't just political; they're cultural, or all kinds of ways. But I would say that, say for Britain, this ancient Christian country. One path is that this kind of post-Christian Paddingtonism, if you want to call it that, it's like the head of the rocket. It's gone through the atmosphere. Everything else underneath it has been jettisoned, and now it's got the power to blast through the solar system. And all that kind of all the stuff that's been jettisoned is all the nonsense about the Bible and Jesus and the church.
It's just baggage.
It's just baggage. It's gone. It's drifted. It's detritus. We have now blasted out, and we're going forward. And the secular principles, the liberal principles, are sufficiently self-evidently right and good that it will sustain the future evolution and development of our society for decades and centuries to come. And therefore, it's culturally determined. I mean, it's clearly derives from Christianity, but you don't need Christianity anymore to kind of provide the rocket fuel. It's going on its own way. Another option, which the history of the 20th century suggests, is that the default assumption among humans is that strength and might is right. Power does have a glamour, and this is what Nietzsche predicted. He said when Christianity goes, there will be this great convulsion, and there will be terrifying powers will emerge. And of course, he was right, because they emerged in the form of fascism. And fascism and Nazism cast such a shadow over us that we've lived in their shadow. In a way, one of the reasons I think for the decline of institutional Christianity is that Hitler has taken the place of the devil, and that a modern liberal now, rather than ask what would Jesus do, as his Victorian forebear would have done, says what would Hitler do, and does the opposite. And that's kind of kept us on our liberal straight and narrow. But that is clearly fading as the experience of fascism in Europe becomes dies out, lived experience of it. So the kind of the bogeyman power of Hitler will fade, and people who are no longer bounded by Christian inhibitions or assumptions, I can imagine them turning around and saying, well, what's wrong with why shouldn't I do what I like? I'm very rich, I'm very powerful, why shouldn't I do exactly what I like? And it's not obvious what the answer to that is, I think, if you don't have the kind of the Christian answers. And I suppose a third possibility is that people will return to the source and say, well, actually, maybe I am Christian. Maybe I should take this a bit more seriously than I have been. And there are I think tentative signs that might be happening.
What's fascinating is I would argue there are signs of all three of those things happening at once.
Of course, and that's what I'm saying, is that all of these things might be happening. Of course, we will also have the growth of Islam, so that also provides a fourth option. And quite how all these different traditions will cope with each other. I mean, it's going to be interesting.
But it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. So Tom Holland had 4 possible paths. There was basically the woke progressivist boosterless rocket that had jettisoned all of these Christian characteristics and was now sailing into the stratosphere, unbounded anymore by these Christian, inconveniences. And what was the thing that pressed the button to detach the rocket from the booster was pride itself, as I've already said. But it still has some characteristics of moralistic therapeutic deism, a belief in progress and the moral arc of the universe. Although there's really no God that makes it that way, they still just kind of think it is that way for reasons that are unclear. They think that they're on the right side of history, but the right side of history is like their judge. They don't have a God who judges at the end of time. They just have enlightened people in the future who they want to try and impress for some reason, even though they won't live to actually impress those people, but it sort of serves as kind of like the cosmic judge. And it definitely has the therapeutic element stronger than ever, really. And it also has the metaphysical bookstore mismatch of New Age stuff. The basically Helena Blavatsky stuff is still there, but the Christian stuff is gone. And so I'm going to play a clip from Ezra Klein talking to Rouse Douthat about this particular thing, and Douthat's trying to ask, what is this thing what is this boosterless rocket, and where's it heading?
Inclusion into what exactly? What view, what vision of the good life? This is where I still feel like the utopianism of your book, while really good as a corrective to despair, lacks something that even the right in its various, sort of dark and black-pilled forms still gets to offer, right? Which is that, the right can say, you see Charlie Kirk say this over and over again, right? In one of the personas that he had was sort of, Christian evangelist and Christian dad, right? Where he would go around and say, look, to young men, he would say, look, politics is important, but you have to get married and you have to go to church and you have to start a family, right? That is a concrete vision of the good life that politics exists to support and technology exists to enrich, right? And in mid-century America, in mid-20th century America, it was connected to a thin but still real sort of Protestant-ish civic religion in which...
What's that thin-ish Protestant civic religion? That's moralistic therapeutic deism that he's talking about.
Human beings had an earthly destiny and a heavenly destiny too. And it is impossible for me as a religious person, I'm sorry, not to look at sort of progressivism right now and say, you need something else in the horizon besides saying we're going to be inclusive and we're going to get rich together with flying cars. You need to say, so that we can live in some specific way that we are supposed to live. What is that way, Ezra Klein? How then shall we live?
My friend, I am a liberal. I actually believe in creating a space for liberal individual flourishing of different kinds. I don't find it to be some great countercultural thing to say you should have a family. I have 2 children. I talk about it on my show.
So Ezra Klein goes on to basically not actually give an answer to the specific question that Douthat was asking, but he's asking, what is this thing? What is this boosterless rocket? Where's it headed? What's the moral vision that gives it a compelling sense of wanting to be on that rocket ship? All right. So then the second option that Tom Holland mentioned was Nietzsche, basically a power makes right. But is this going to be a right wing or a left wing Nietzsche? He sort of alluded to being a fascist thing. But one could imagine a left-wing Nietzsche as well. If the military gets involved or the military splits into partisan loyalties, this is the imperfect environment for a Napoleon-type figure to use force to come to power and to enforce a consensus that hasn't been reached by other means. The chaos of the French Revolution, where there was no longer any arbiter, no longer any shared story, no longer any arena that was mutually agreed upon by the different fighting factions in which justice could be mutually agreed upon, what ends up filling that vacuum was the powerful Napoleon, but he came in as a defender of the revolution against the forces that the revolution had stood against. He was more of a left-wing figure who then ends up looking a lot like a right-wing figure once he's come into power. So if there is something like a civil war or a soft civil war in the United States, that would be the perfect environment for a Napoleon-type figure to emerge. All right, the third option was Christian nationalism of some kind. Basically, this would stay faithful to the American story. It would turn up the dial on the American particularities in the American identity, or the Christian particularities in the American identity again, kind of go back to an earlier stage where Christianity was a little bit more front and center in the American identity. But how far to turn it up and who gets left out of that process as that dial gets turned up and what happens to them. And Tom Holland mentions Islam, but Islam in America just isn't the same size or the same force that it is in Europe. And so I don't think that one's particularly relevant. All right, quoting Ross Douthat's recent column to give him even more time to talk. 8 years ago, religious conservatives made a bargain with Donald Trump and accepted the leadership of a flagrant immoralist as the price of protection against a then ascendant seeming secular progressivism. This is that rising progressivism, that rising secularism that Keller was talking about. The agonies involved in this political compromise fractured churches, divided pundits, and seemed to introduce a further crisis into an American Christianity already dealing with scandal, disaffection, and decline. But today, conservative Christians are eager to tell a different story. And Charlie Kirk's memorial service on Sunday, a gathering of political figures where politics was subordinated to preaching, culminated in Erica Kirk's extraordinarily moving message of forgiveness for her husband's killer. And it was a stage for a narrative of revival, recovery, conversion, and Christian strength. Trump was there, of course, and still very much his unchristian self. His off-script comments about his inability to feel anything but hatred for his own enemies were funny in the Trumpian way, but also plainly true. But the idea that the future belongs to a post-Christian right, a subject we've considered in this newsletter, seemed not just absent, but almost absurd. As the leaders of the Republican Party lined up for a memorial that doubled as an evangelical revival, complete with altar calls. In this scenario, rather than being a harbinger of a paganized American future, Trump himself would be seen as a transitional figure, an agent of destabilization who delivered the coup de grace that the nostalgia-driven moralism of religious conservatism 1.0, while clearing the ground for religious conservatism 2.0, a more intentional and mission-driven post-secular formation, in which case the Christian right's bargain with Trumpism would look less corrupting and more necessary, in the strange way that Providence writes with crooked lines. So what is this future Christian nationalism? I think it will be increasingly clear which side of this divide. Basically, I think that option 2 is only going to happen if there's a civil war, basically that post-Christian right figure, or it could be a post-Christian left authoritarianism as well. But barring option 2, where we have options 1 and 3 from Holland's list, where we've got woke progressivism, that is the rocket ship that has cut itself off from its rocket, or a Christian nationalism, which interestingly Konstantin Kisin chose as his favorite of the 4 options. I think as those 2 options become increasingly starkly different from each other, it will become increasingly obvious which side Christians will feel is the only place where they can belong. And that will be true not just of Christians, but of traditionally religious folks of many different persuasions. A God family country with vaguely evangelical flavors might just do the trick. Charlie Kirk might have given us the path to follow. The new Christian nationalism will have to offer not just a more compelling policy, but a more compelling arena in which to do policy at all. It must hold out its hand to the left-wing arenic competitor and treat it with the power of love and forgiveness embodied by Erica, but not by Trump. The hope is to stave off civil war while the arenas compete, and the Christian morality can give it an ability to treat its enemy better than the way its enemy treats it. The left-wing post-progressives will die under their own weight in this scenario. In the meantime, the Christian nationalism arena should accommodate both ends of the Christian political spectrum. It must welcome in left-leaning Christians who are currently wary of Christian nationalism, even though they support their own Christian nationalism. Mark Parker, you are a Christian nationalist. Admit it. Own your own Christian nationalism. You're just a left-wing Christian nationalism. Come to the Christian nationalism. Own up to it. You know that you are, and many other people besides. But this Christian nationalism embodied by Erica Kirk must welcome in that left-wing Christianity as well as the right-wing Christianity, as well as other ideological misfits like MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, embodied by RFK Jr., and also the Konstantin Kisin types, who are this sort of IDW post-liberal misfits that don't belong anywhere else. This arena will need to present a moral value system that is the coherent center. It will need to present a version of the American story that is specific enough to be compelling, but also open enough to be inviting. It will need to find a way to talk about God and religion with enough specificity to give direction, but it also must accommodate religious minorities as well. Wait a minute. What I'm telling Christian nationalism to do and what to be is it needs to be a new moralistic therapeutic deism. And I hope by the time I've gotten to this point in the video, and I'm just about to end, is I hope you can see that even if you didn't like moralistic therapeutic deism in the last episode or throughout most of this episode, I think you can now see what it was trying to do and why it looked the way that it looked. Moralistic therapeutic deism is dead. Long live moralistic therapeutic deism.